Hey, thank you, Ryan, and I'm excited to be here and just to get to share a few minutes together. I mean, you and I have known each other for quite a few years, and I love what art of homeownership stands for, and being able to bring a difference or make a difference out in the market by what we bring to consumers, maybe in some cases what we bring to referral partners or people we're doing business with. So my hope today is that I can give you a few things that you can use to educate, really, to help people in this market. And to your point, Ryan, there's so many things that are changing, day in, day out, week in, week out, as we've gone through these last few weeks of, depending on where you're at across the country, of lockdown and quarantine based on all the things going on with coronavirus. So we've got some updates there. I'm going to share my screen and maybe Ryan, let me know if you can see it here in just a second. And that way, I'll be able to show some of the visuals. And these visuals that I'm going to use today, I'm going to send Ryan a copy of that he'll be able to get out to you, so everybody can access these. So I'm going to share right here. Is that working for us?
Yeah, we got it.
Perfect. And I will let you know, I don't know if you can see it on the screen. Somehow my PowerPoint is going through an update, so hopefully that'll work well with us. So
Yeah, no,
I titled this kind of looking. You can, okay. I titled this "Looking Ahead." And really a real estate market update. And if we kind of think about the last few weeks we've been in, it's kind of looking behind. And I can tell you, talking with agents and folks in our business all across this country, that I think consumers, I think we all want to look kind of ahead, not forsaking what we've been through, and certainly not saying that we're out of the woods with regard to all that, but generally where we want to try to help people is say, okay, what's coming up? How can we be a trusted advisor way? And I kind of organize this into 5 areas maybe that we'll talk about. And Ryan, maybe we'll go through these, and we'll start out here at economic recovery update and why the housing market really is poised to lead us out of it. Maybe go through each one of those, and maybe we can have a small discussion after that. If there are questions, certainly put those in the chat, and we can answer those. But with that as kind of a backdrop, we'll get started. Okay. So
sounds great.
First thing we want to touch on is just economic recovery and what's going on there. We'll hit a little bit of update on recession, and is this 2008 all over again? A big question out there. The third piece is unemployment. What about all the jobs that have been lost over the last few weeks? And then maybe switching into a little bit of a different framework of just the benefits of home ownership, which we need to get back into the posture of reminding people of that. And I'll end kind of with what we need to do right now for our business. So with that as a backdrop, we'll start with this economic recovery update. And I'll start with a quote here from the CEO of the Hershey Company. And Michelle says here, while comparisons can certainly be drawn to weather-related disruptions or natural disasters or recessions, the reality is we have never seen so many factors at play at the same time on such a global scale. So this really kicks off our time as we start to look at, what is the economic forecast, coming up. And I'm going to talk about that from what major financial institutions are talking about. But I think this quote sets it up really well, because there's so many things that economists have to consider today when they make projections. And, we certainly, an economist is used to dealing with the business science, and that's really how the economy has rebounded or performed from similar slowdowns that have happened in the past. But as you can see up on the screen there, I've got 2 other sciences that they have to deal with is they're making projections today. So the first there, or the second, is the health science, and that's when will COVID-19 be under control, and will there be another flare-up of the virus this fall? Big concern and big question that people are asking right now. The next is the people science, and that's after businesses are fully operational. How long will it take American consumers to return to normal consumption patterns? Going to a movie, attending a sporting event, maybe getting on an airplane. And so these are all things that economists today are dealing with to be able to say, okay, what can we look at as far as economic recovery and projections relative to that? So what I'll bring in here is what major financial institutions are calling for. And it's really a second half recovery, second half of this year. We know relative to GDP, the first quarter came in and we constricted, or it became a negative at 4.8%. We're expecting further constriction here in the second quarter that we're in right now, and the kind of this wild ride down, as we know businesses have been, placed on pause all over the country out of, fear of contracting coronavirus. In a lot of cases, in most states, being required to shut down or certainly slow their service to customers based on, social distancing and things that need to be done there. But as we turn the corner to the second half of the year, we see that in the third quarter, 4 out of the 5 of these major financial institutions, you can see them listed here, are calling for positive growth in GDP, and 5 out of the 5 are calling for positive growth in the fourth quarter. So as we start to turn the quarter to the second half of this year, most major financial institutions say, okay, we'll see economic recovery start to happen. And I want to bring in a quote here from Merrill Lynch, and it says, we fully expect the economy could begin to pick up in late June and July with a strong recovery in the fourth quarter. So really, again, kind of saying, okay, as we look to the second half of this year, we're going to see the economy pick up. Here's a quote from Morgan Stanley. It says, we believe that the U.S. economy is set for a U-shape or even a V-shape recovery, where economic activity will bottom perhaps very soon and then recover steadily. So, there's this talk out in the market, is it going to be a V? Is it going to be a U? Is it going to be a W? And there are a lot of different names that have been given to it, a check mark or a Nike swoosh. There have been a lot of things that have been said there. And, depending on where, people feel like it's going to be, or they want to say it's a U, they want to say it's a V. Most major financial institutions are saying we should see economic recovery and economic growth start to happen in the second half of the year. So let's talk about what that means to our business. So what we look at is start to say, okay, what are leading indicators of, economic recovery relative to real estate across the country? And the one that we look at and we've used, if you follow KCM or Keeping Current Matters, is showing time. And this is really a survey across North America of the number of showings that are being scheduled, whether it be virtually or in person or some way safely through the pandemic. And what you can see there, it's interesting, as we started out the year, we were kind of going up and getting ready for the spring market, and then around the 1st of March fell off the map here relative to showings. Is literally all of us retreated into our homes, and depending on where you're at across the country, that happened at different times. But we said, okay, look, we're dealing with something here, and folks aren't going to be leaving their homes, aren't going to be going out looking at homes, and in many cases, real estate, whether it's essential or non-essential, vary by state to state. Some couldn't even do that. And then we saw that go down and then bottom out sometime end of March, call it middle of April, first part of April. And we've been on this slow climb here in showings across the country. And I'm going to give you these slides. You'll have the slide. There's a link in the slide to the actual report where you can go grab your state and look at what's happening in your state. But I'll tell you, nationally, this data is up to the 24th, which was Sunday. It's when we crossed over where we would be normally at this time of the year, which is really starting to plateau out, and we're seeing this kind of climb above that. So we'll watch it to see where we end up, but suffice it to say, people are now making the decision to say, okay, the need that we had to go out and look for a home or sell our home or whatever the case may be, our need, and we're manifesting that need by going to look at real estate, is still there. And so that's happening across the country, and certainly represented by this graph here. And it really kind of goes into what I'll talk about in just a minute, or what are the benefits of home ownership, and reminding people of that. June coming up next week, Monday is June 1st, is National Home Ownership Month that NAR coined as a way to just talk about home ownership. And we know that 93% of people in this Concentric Analytics study said it makes them happier to own their home. 88% said it's the best decision ever, and 79% said they believe owning a home has changed them for the better. So we know there are a lot of benefits, and we're not even getting into financial benefits at this point. But the benefits of owning a home, and in that homeownership growth, we certainly expect to continue. And it means so much to so many Americans, a place to raise a family, an investment, reaching a life milestone, these life events that cause us to have a need to either grow in a home, own a home, downsize a home, things like that. I'm going to give you all of these graphics, but if you do want them in shareable formats, I'll pop this up here real quick. We just released easy to share social graphics, so you can share all the data that I'm going to give you on our TryKCM/social page. Just a quick note there. But let's talk just a minute about our business and what experts are saying about the bottom and really where we could be heading. So this comes again from Showing Time, from the Chief Analytics Officer, and it says the beginning of April marked the absolute bottom of per capita real estate activity since the Great Depression, as 3/4 of buyer traffic evaporated. Yet that was immediately followed by an unprecedented turnaround. We've seen a significant rebound in May as rapidly returning buyer traffic concentrates on the subdued levels of inventory. So really, what are they saying there? I think they're stating what we knew on some level, that we saw activity constrict in March and in the first part of April. And really what we're seeing right now is unprecedented, volume coming back into the market. But what we need is inventory. And I think we all know that. And depending on where you're at in the country and the price point that you work in, that's going to vary. But suffice it to say, as we look across the country, inventory is one of the biggest needs that we have. Now, according to Realtor.com, and as we move into May here, we're starting to see a tick up in listings taken, which is a good thing. But I think if we're out in the market today, the message is, if you want to sell your home, now is the time. When do you ever want to sell something? When there are, simple economics, when there are less of that thing in the market is when you want to bring it to market. And so we hope to see a trend here, new listings coming on the market. Housing Wire released just this morning that applications for mortgages to purchase a home gained for the sixth consecutive week to a level that was 6.7% higher than a year ago. So we're seeing these purchase applications, which, they're out looking at homes. You want those to turn into pending sales, and obviously go out and obtain financing for that home is a great indicator of what, we can start to see in the summer. And I'll kind of wrap this up, Ryan, before I pause just a second. This just came out from the Wall Street Journal. It says 85.3% of economists believe recovery will begin in the second half of 2020. Kind of going back to what we said. So as your customers have questions about when is the economy going to recover, what role is real estate going to play in it, we certainly believe, as we look at these experts, that in the second half of this year, really in this one, beginning in the third quarter, that the economy will begin to recover. And I think we can make a case that real estate in this country will help lead the way out. So I want to pause for a second there, Ryan. I don't know if we have any questions, or if there are any questions that you have as we kind of talk this through and, go through this. But, this question of economic recovery is a big question that a lot of people have.
Yeah, no, I think it's an awesome thing to talk about, because right now, we're finding a lot of buyers who, they have a desire to buy, they want to buy, they're just somewhat paralyzed by the thought of buying into something and having it drop in value, and it's the standard
Sure.
Concern that most buyers have. So
Sure.
Guys, put your questions in the chat box. One of the questions I have is, what's the best way that we can get, that you've found from a lot of your experience, to get this message out in the community in a way that is easy to understand, and the way that's approachable and doesn't seem salesy? Because obviously, if it comes from us, they believe there's some form of bias, right? Which is why obviously we use a lot of those third-party references. But what have you found? Is it Zoom webinars? Is it social media? What are you finding there?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things, and I want to add one other thing to what you said. How do we do it and not be salesy? How do we use a third-party proof source that essentially says, Ryan, don't listen to what I'm saying, not in a negative way, but let's look at what these experts are saying. The other is, and I'll add to this, is when in the age of social media, how do we put something out in the market and not be combative? Because a lot of people go, well, you're wrong, this is going to happen, or want to take a position on that. So it's a great question. I think what you want to do is you want to do a couple of things, and I'm going to get into these at the end, but we'll kind of hop there. One, you want to say, okay, what's happening in this country? And that's what I'm talking about right now is macro data. Like where you're at, Ryan, Orange County, I don't have this, the information. I can get it and I can pull it for this presentation. But if I was you today, I would say, okay, look, here's what's happening in showings. Let me tell you what's happening in Orange County right now. Here are the number of pending sales we have. Here are the number of new listings that came on the market. Here's whatever local information I can share with people to show people that activity is happening. And here, if I'm a real estate professional in the business today, a loan officer in the business today, I would then come back with that and say, this is how I am taking safety as a differentiator in the market right now. Here is what I am doing to make sure that the clients we serve remain safe, whether that's a showing that's maybe virtual or whatever the case may be, or the different precautions in going in the house. So I would definitely highlight that. The next question was, how do you do it? I heard I connected with an agent a couple of weeks ago that had hosted a Zoom call for everybody they had met with that was thinking about buying a home this year, and just said, hey, here is what's happening in the market. They took all of our stuff, and again, I'm going to give you this information, and they said, okay, here's what's happening with economic recovery. I'm going to go into recession. Here's a little bit about what's happening in recession. Here's an update on unemployment. Here's what we believe is happening in our market right now. The biggest issue I would start to communicate with people on is supply and demand right now. We know we need more homes on the market. The lack of supply is going to continue to put this upward pressure on prices, because that's the question. Why would I go buy a house right now if that house is going to lose value? And so certainly depending on where you're at in this country, you'll have to answer that question. But that is the question that a lot of people are going to ask. But I would do it in gathering groups of people together on a Zoom call or something like it, to be able to, just like we're doing here.
Yeah, I think it's great.
So,
guys, for everyone on this call, we know, as a real estate agent, as a mortgage professional, our job is not to convince people to buy, sell, or finance homes. Our job is to give them the data, give them the information, help them make intelligent, educated decisions that are specific to their unique needs and their unique situation. And this is exactly what we need to do that, right? Because we need to just dispel the fear-based myths with factual evidence, and then, let them client make the decision from there.
Totally. And that's where I think, if we were in our office here, I'm in my home office, but if we were in the KCM office, we have this big wall that says we believe every family should feel confident when buying and selling a home. And I think that's what you're talking about, Ryan, is how do we give them the truth and trust their intelligence for them to be able to make the best decision for them and their family. So with that as a backdrop, one of the big questions is recession. The technical definition of a recession is 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP. We know the first quarter, if you remember that slide I showed, came in negative. Second quarter here will come in much, much more negative, and that's literally a measure of economic activity. And I would argue this isn't news. We know that businesses across the country have shut down or are in a mode where they certainly can't do the volume of business that they have been. Now, some businesses are doing well in that. If you're in the sign business today, you go up and look at all the signs that say we're open, or the signs on, something else to say this is how we're serving customer, you're probably doing pretty good in the sign business. But if you're in the restaurant business, if you're lucky, maybe you're maintaining, if you have a strong takeout business, but there are a lot of businesses that can't operate, small businesses that we know that are hurting right now. So the question becomes, okay, are we about to go down this path of 2008 again? A big concern. So I want to address that and share a little bit of information there. So second question in kind of this journey of topics here is this 2008 all over again? So the Keeping Current Matters research team went back and looked at 2008 and compared that time to right now. And I want to go through a few comparisons that you can use to help show people the difference in the market then as compared to today. The first is home price appreciation. So on the left are the 6 years leading up to the housing crash, and on the right are the 6 years leading up to today. And as you look at the left, just visually, when you look at it, you can see the difference in the 6 years leading up to the housing crash and how they're much higher than the 6 years leading up to today. And I would argue back then that we had in this country runaway appreciation relative to home prices. And when I say the word runaway, I always think of a Western movie, and somebody runs into town and they say there's a runaway train coming. And we know at that point something bad's about to happen. And we know back then something bad did happen, where our business was literally at the epicenter of the financial downturn in this country. And as we pivot to today, while we know we've had appreciation over the last 6 years, not to the extent that we had back then. And I would say that runaway appreciation back then led to a lot of the issues that we saw in the housing and mortgage collapse back in 2008. So big difference there in relative to appreciation in the two markets. The second difference I would bring you to is literally the inventory difference between 2008 and today, where if you look here, you can see sometime around 2008, depending on when you look, we're 10 or 11 months of inventory, a buyer's market, literally an oversupply of homes on the market. If you take this neutral market of 6 to 7 months as an example. And we know that oversupply led to a lot of the issues that we faced in the housing crash. And what do we know about today? Well, we started this year, with great, activity on the real estate side, of the economy. And we thought, in our business, the biggest issue we would face this year would be inventory and maybe the limited number of homes on the market for people that want to buy them. And along came the coronavirus, and we had bigger issues than that, obviously, we know today. But where we sit today with regard to inventory is a very different picture than where we sat then. Literally, we have an undersupply of homes on the market, where we entered into this pandemic with about 3 months of supply, a little bit higher than that. You'll want to, certainly this is a great place, Ryan, you talked about, hey, how do we bring this to it? Be able to show this visually. Here's where we are nationally, but here's where we are where you live, where you do business, right, so that you can really show people this is what's going on.
Yep.
The next piece that I want to bring in here is really a telling picture, and it's the total home equity cashed out in the 3 years leading up to 2008 compared to the 3 years leading up to today. And back then on the left, you can see the 3 years leading up to 2008, $824 billion was done as cash out refis across the country. And I would say at that time, people literally using their homes as ATMs, going out and funding vacations and lifestyles and buying jet skis, whatever the case may be, financing things, thinking this will never end. And you look at today, the total of cash out refinances over the last 3 years, $247 billion, a fraction of what it was back then. Suffice it to say, I think when you look at these two pictures, consumers are handling the equity in their homes much differently than they did back leading up to the housing crash. I think really I could go as far to say there were lessons learned in 2008 that people do not want to repeat. They don't want to go down that road again, leading to a much different scenario in equity across this country, relative to where people sit versus harvesting equity off of their homes, like was done back then. Now, John Burns Consulting, which is a respected consulting company in our business, they do a lot of business with a lot of publicly traded builders and hedge fund owners that participate in real estate. They came out with this percentage of homeowner equity in 2020. And 42.1% of the homes in this country are owned free and clear. Just shocking. It's a dramatic number. And you see 16.6 have greater than 60% equity. And you can go around the wheel here and look at each one of those numbers. Now, again, I'll give these slides to you, but significant amount of equity in homes across this country today, leading us to this statistic: 58.7% of the homes in this country have at least 60% equity. And we add to that 42% are owned free and clear. They don't even have a mortgage. And homes that do have a mortgage, CoreLogic tells us that the average equity on a home that's mortgaged in this country is $177,000. So no one's calling for depreciation right now, Ryan, but let's say homes did depreciate and that 177,000 turned into $100,000. Nobody's walking away from $100,000. Back in 2008, when you literally owed more on the home than it was worth, you were underwater, people just walked. And the equity position of homes across this country today is very, very strong, leading again to different decisions that have been made about equity, but differences in what people see as far as where they want to really build their financial wealth. So I want to cover a couple other things about 2008 relative to this, but we can use those, all the information I just covered with you, to show the very real differences between today and 2008. But I want to bring in this quote from First American, and it says, "Many still bear scars from the Great Recession and may expect the housing market to follow a similar trajectory in response to the coronavirus outbreak." I'm going to pause there. He says, look, people got hurt back in the Great Recession, and no doubt there are people that are hurt today, but when you're hurt like that in 2008, you expect to be hurt again. And what we have to remind people is where our business was at the center of the downturn back then, we now deal with an external housing crisis. We made the case in the first part of this that housing is positioned to lead business in this country, really economic growth as we go forward. And we need to point those out. But I want to go to the second half of this. It says, but there are distinct differences, we just talked about those, that indicate the housing market may follow a much different path. And while housing led the recession in 2008 and 2009, this time it may be poised to bring us out of it. So very different, very logical for people to say, okay, I think this is going to be another downturn in housing, but we deal with very, very different situations and factors in the housing market today than we did back then. Because really the message we have to get out there is recession does not equal housing crisis. Recession equals economic slowdown, and that makes sense. Businesses have slowed down during this, but as we turn that corner to the second half of the year and businesses are able to come back online and do business again, that we should see that growth start to occur. And so what our team did is we took some CoreLogic data and we went back and looked at the last 5 recessions in this country and the impact it had on home prices. And just like Mark just said, what we remember is 2008, where we lost almost 20% in value in homes across this country. And then that's right there in our brains as we think about this. But if we look at the 4 recessions prior to that, we know that one time in 1991, homes lost value in the recession, but we know in 3 others, we actually gained value. And in 2 of those years, over 6% in the year. So I think we can confidently say that recession does not equal housing crash. Recession equals economic slowdown. And I'm not trying to play with the words there. I'm trying to make a point that we have to, kind of to Ryan's initial statement as we got started here, deliver this information to the clients that we serve. So I'll pause again because this is a big point in what we're talking about, being able to bring the truth out into the market.
Yeah, again, if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat box. I think the biggest takeaway for this to me is recession is a very scary word for the average person in the financial world. I mean, not even in the financial business, but just in general, right? And so a lot of people think, well, recession means I'm going to lose money. In reality, it's, we have to make sure we help people understand if there is a recession. Yes, there is one. How deep it goes, but the depression, how does it impact you?
Yeah.
Right? Because I always tell you guys have heard me say this before. Clients shouldn't be worried about the national economy or the global economy. They should be worried about their personal economy. And a lot of times people look at these headlines and they immediately think, well, my personal economy is going to go down because of this recession. That's probably not often the case, right? A lot of people get through recessions and actually do well, or they're protected against them based upon the type of work they're in, or the type of financial situation they're in, if they're invested in the market or not. So the key is to say, look, whether we're in a, obviously we know we're in a recession now, but whether this becomes a prolonged recession, a short-lived one, a V shape or a U shape, who really cares, right? The only thing we care about is what's your exposure, what's your impact, how will this affect the real estate you own currently, or how could it affect your ability to own real estate in the future? And that's
Yeah.
really all that matters when it comes to recession. Sure, explain what it is and explain, why we believe we're going to come out of it and how, it may or may not impact real estate. But more importantly, focus on the person sitting in front of you or the person you're talking to, because they're thinking recession and they immediately think, well, now's not a good time to do anything. It's a recession. And you have to work through that with them and get them to understand sometimes recessions are the best times to do things, right? You just have to really figure out when, why. Some of you may have watched the presentation I did last week where, we may have this 6-month window where sellers are a little bit more open to negotiating because they're thinking the same thing, right? Sellers are thinking recession, I got to get my home sold quick. I got to do this, that, or the other, or I need, access to capital. I can't get cash out refis right now, and so there's opportunities for people who can maneuver through the headlines, and that's our responsibility, is to help people maneuver through the headlines and do what's appropriate for them, right? Which is why being an Art of Homeownership professional gives you that distinction, because you have that knowledge.
Yeah. I think Ryan, as you were saying that, the idea of caring about what's going on with that individual, I think is a big piece of this. And I was thinking about my dad growing up used to always say this. He'd say, David, what's the difference between a recession and a depression? And I was like, I don't know, until he said it about 100 times, and I got it. He said a recession is when your neighbor loses their job, and a depression is when you lose your job,
Yeah.
And so to your point, Ryan, we were talking earlier about, how are you impacted this? You're in the sign business. Maybe you're impacted, positively in this. You're in the restaurant business. You're impacted negatively. You work for a hotel or an airline. You're impacted negatively. I mean, this area of the economy of, consumer discretionary spending is what's being hit hardest. You're in another business. You're doing better. But I think that point of saying, what's your situation? How is this affecting you? Let's look at the broader U.S. picture so we can make sense of it, but also look at what's going on. And I think that tees us up to talk just a minute about unemployment, because we know there are people that have been affected by this in the work they do every day. They've been, laid off, furloughed. Maybe they're working for a business that's filing for bankruptcy, or is impacted even rougher than a temporary type of slowdown. So let's talk about unemployment for a second, and I'll share those slides to kind of kick us off there. So big question out in the market: what about all the job loss? What's that going to do to the overall economy? So I'll start here with this Ben Bernanke quote. It says, "I don't find comparing the current downturn with the Great Depression to be very helpful. The expected duration is much less, and the causes are very different." Okay, so we got to keep in mind we're dealing with an external health crisis. That crisis obviously has impacted businesses, but we're dealing with something that's very different than a fundamental issue in the economy. And so really, most of the information that's out there, the Wall Street Journal kind of coined this phrase that, it does more to terrify than it does to clarify today. And you have a lot of people saying, okay, is unemployment going to give us this scenario like the Great Depression? So I want to compare right here where we're at today to the Great Depression so that people visually can see the difference. And so these are projections there, and the actuals in that orangish color, and then blue are projections going forward. Those are 4 years during the Great Depression that unemployment was over 20%. So we know last month, the April unemployment report came in at 14.7%. We'll have a look at the May unemployment report next Friday on the 5th of June. Most are predicting that will go above 14.7% and, land somewhere, in that range. If we speculate, is it going to be 20%? Is it going to be 18%? We really don't know. And then, coming down over the 4 years kind of after that. So when you look at this, you can see, okay, this is what happened in the Great Depression. This is what we're looking at right now. This spike in unemployment this year, but by next year it being down to 9%, then you can see there on after. And I'm not saying 9% is great unemployment, but it is not Great Depression level unemployment. Okay, so that's the first one. The second, I want to just give you perspective on. This is a a look at the weekly unemployment filings all the way from the middle of March when this started to today, which will be what comes out tomorrow, May 23rd. The market's expecting about 2 million jobs to be 2 million people to file for unemployment benefits. And while that's certainly a big number, I'm not trying to make it out like it's not. It's certainly not 6.9 million jobs lost like we saw at the end of March. And you can notice, so over the weeks we've continued to trend down, and our hope is that we continue to trend down. And it leads to this question of who is actually being laid off or impacted by unemployment. And this is a breakdown of the last unemployment report. We'll do the next one on June 5th, where we say, okay, who lost their jobs? And you can see weighted right here that almost 40% are people in the service business and restaurants, servers and bartenders. Another 10.2% each in retail and temp services. And then you can go on down the line and see all of that. Doctors' offices right now, almost 7% of people unemployed are in doctors' offices. We know those folks are coming back as, the need to go to the pediatrician or dentist or some other, type of surgery or elective procedure didn't get, delayed. It got delayed, but the reason didn't go away. Manufacturing, we certainly know we need folks in the childcare business back when they can safely, bring kids back together. And on down the line, folks in the travel and hotel hospitality business, there's some question marks there on how are they going to innovate? How are they going to be able to do things relative to folks feeling safe and staying in a hotel or traveling? But one thing we have to keep in mind is if 14.7% of the population does not have a job, it still means 85.3% of the population do have a job. So anybody that's saying, okay, we're at 15% unemployment, nobody's gonna be able to buy a house. We're at 20% unemployment, nobody's gonna be able to buy a house. Well, in both those scenarios, at least 80% of the people have a job. So we're gonna watch this. They survey those folks when they file for those benefits. 9 out of 10 said this is a temporary situation for me. I'm going to get my job back. I'm going back to work as the business is allowed to operate. Now the question is, and it's a very good question that we're going to watch, is do those temporary layoffs or furloughs turn into more permanent ones or longer ones? And I think that's certainly the case. That could happen. And so we're going to watch that and see where that kind of starts to line up across what other data we're going to see. We'll have another look at this soon, but suffice it to say, and I think First American sums it up well. They say here, our analysis shows that the nature of this service sector driven recession, I want to pause there for a second. We talked about our business driving the last recession. This one is really the areas of impact, or what's driving it is the service sector. Important to realize. It says this service sector driven recession is unlikely to result in a one-to-one decline in home ownership demand, because those being impacted disproportionately by this recession are much less likely to have been house hunting in the first place. So that can sound a little rough or crude. I want to acknowledge those families, and I'm certainly not saying, hey, just because they're not looking for a house does not mean that we should handle it any differently. It just brings perspective to our business, because what we know right now is that job loss is more weighted or more heavily impacting folks at lower incomes. This was a study by the Wall Street Journal where they studied at least one job loss in the household. We know those, under 40K, 40% of those people have been impacted. And as you go up higher in income, you can see it's less impact. So we know folks on the lower end of income are being more disproportionately impacted. And going back to that First American quote, they probably weren't looking for homes in the first place. So it helps us understand demand where that would be. And I'll kind of end on this in the unemployment piece. This is really two things you want to look at unemployment. There are two critical pieces. One is the depth or the number, literally the amount of unemployment. The second is the length. So in red here, you see the Goldman Sachs projection for unemployment, which is probably the most dire or the most conservative, maybe someone would say, or the highest. And they say, okay, while we may hit a number of 20 or 25% this year, the projections are by the fourth year we'll return to where we were prior to the pandemic. And we know in yellow there, it took us 9 years to return in unemployment during the Great Recession. And during the Great Depression, it took us 12 years to return in this country to a level of where we were before we started. So while the depth or that number there of 20 or 25% or whatever it turns out to be of unemployment is high, I'm not saying it's not high, the length is not projected to be anywhere near what we saw in the Great Recession or Great Depression. So a few things that hopefully help, bring some context to the unemployment situation across this country, because families, individuals are being affected, and it's causing a lot of people to think, okay, is this going to mean that home prices are going to deteriorate based on that? And it's something our team's watching. I think it's worth to say too, because we probably have people from all over the country on this, economies that are, more favored or weighted towards travel, like Las Vegas or Orlando or places where they're destinations, they're certainly going to see a greater impact maybe than somewhere that's not. I talked to someone a couple of weeks ago from Hawaii, and it's, they're experiencing a tough time there, and unemployment. If you think about it, you got to get on a plane to get there, and the economy is driven by tourism. So areas like that, certainly we're going to watch those and say, okay, how's that going to impact, what's going on? So Ryan, any unemployment questions there? I know we're 10 minutes to the top of the hour, and I want to try to get through some of this, but I want to hang to and talk about what, if there are any questions or thoughts in your mind relative to that.
No, yeah, I think that was well put. I think it's important to understand that unemployment is not the same for everybody, as you so well put. So when you're talking to clients, again, it's unemployment number can seem drastic, but when they think they're going to go out and get a smoking deal on a house because there's no buyer demand, we want to educate them that that's not the case at all. Again, sixth straight week up in terms of mortgage applications for new purchases, and up over year. So all those are good indicators to show people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it. I'll pop a couple of things in here as we kind of start to wrap here, and I'm gonna. We talked about what we need to do, so I'll skip that part, but I want to show you some interesting things that kind of lead to this, home ownership idea and a greater, idea around why people buy homes. And so the first is the census just released the first quarter results of U.S. home ownership rates, and we've seen over the last 4 years the home ownership rate in this country growing, and we know it was growing back before the downturn. We took this this ride down, and then about 2015 started going back up, and it's for a lot of the reasons that we covered earlier, that financially it's a great decision, and non-financially it's a great decision. All the reasons I would guess that all of us got into the business to want to help people achieve the dream of home ownership. And so we certainly expect this trend to continue, the home ownership rate to rise. And we know right now, according to the National Association of Home Builders, this is very interesting, and I'll read it. It says the number of homeowners increased by 2.6 million, that's in the first quarter, while the number of renter households declined by 0.6 million. Indeed, the number of homeowner households has been climbing since the third quarter of 2015, while the number of renter households has been on a downward trend. This implies that the transition from renting to owning has been a powerful driver of the net increase in households. And why is that? Because we know since 1988, the median asking price of rent has just been on this slow, kind of just rise over time. And we know that renters don't get the, the financial benefits, the tax benefits, the pride of ownership, all the things that we know about owning a home, they don't have access to. And really, I think even in this pandemic, looking at people saying, I want to make a different decision, whether that's I own a place in an urban area, or I'm renting a place in a more congested urban area, and I want to move to a more suburban area. We're watching studies that are forming on that. I don't think we have enough information on that to say that's absolutely happening, but I'll tell you this, in my brain, when somebody says that may be what I want to do, it seems logical, that they might want to do that. And so we're going to continue to watch that. But suffice it to say that this trend of home ownership is being driven by people that are renting. And I'll close this way before I turn it over to you, Ryan. There's four things we can do right now that I would argue in our business is critical to get this message out. The first is making your message simple and effective. And hopefully what we've done today is I've given you a few graphs and things that you can post on social media, you can use to make a simple and effective message, kind of like what you said, Ryan. Hey, you're thinking this is going to be the situation, but let me show you why it's not. The second, remain hyper current on all your housing information, just like what you're doing here, what you do each week, Ryan, is bringing information in so that you can go, okay, this is changing, this is happening in the market, bringing in, information that'll help you communicate that. Third, mixing micro data, which is your local data, with your macro data. So the way a consumer generally is informed in the market is by turning the TV on. And they get information that way. Most times is not localized information, but it could be. But if you're able to say, okay, this is what's being said, this is what, again, going back to unemployment, they're saying it's going to be like the Great Depression. Well, let's break it down and look at it. They're saying, is the housing market going to collapse? Let's look at the fundamentals, and then let's look at what's happening here in our neighborhood is the best way to be able to combat that and be able to deliver that message. And fourth, use videos. Get on video. I think about that, holding the phone up there and saying, hey, I just got off a webinar talking about unemployment or talking about why it's a great time to buy. If you're thinking about buying a home or you're thinking about selling a home, we should talk. Or I'm going to host a Zoom with a partner of mine to be able to do that and deliver the message to it and bring this information, because this is the first time that we've been through a pandemic with the power of social media and the power to be able to deliver that. And, we mentioned kind of the informing nature of television, and I won't go down that road tremendously, except to say this: the job of TV is to get people to watch more TV. It is not to bring them necessarily the news. They're there to say, okay, how can we bring something together that gets more people stoked up to want to watch more or learn more? And it's our job to say, okay, this is what's happening in the market. This is what we need to do, or this is how you can make the best decision for you and your family. So, Ryan, I'll pause there. That's what I have. Certainly, if there are any questions or any comments, we can talk about those. I know you had a few things you want to say before we wrapped up, but just know from my heart, man, I appreciate what you're doing and what everybody on the call is doing with the art of home ownership, and truly being a differentiator out in the market, being able to deliver value is, I think, what we're all excited about. So I'm grateful to be on here.